Okay, so Avista. How many folks heard of the Hydro One trying to acquire Avista? So Angelo and others know all about it, but when we started the water rates adjudication stuff, it was friends from the Farm Bureau and what I call rural legislators who said, Norm, will you meet with these folks at the North Idaho Fairgrounds in Kootenai County? I said, is it by the building where I did my 4-H projects? Okay. So, I mean, that's how these things start. So this was the same deal. We're at back room of a small restaurant in Coeur d'Alene, and we're talking about what's going on with this and what can be done to stop a foreign company's acquisition of the utility that provides power in this region. And that's exactly what it was. I mean, it isn't just that it's a Canadian utility company, it's a Canadian province, Ontario-owned utility. It's a crown corporation that, well, they decided they needed to raise some money, so they sold a certain portion of the stock, but they still have the controlling interest, and they set it up such that even if they end up with less than 50%, they still have a controlling interest because it takes a 2/3 vote to do anything meaningful. If I own 40% and it takes 2/3 to do anything, I've got the controlling interest, right? So for whatever reason, Avista decided, I guess money, what was it, $5.3 billion deal? Depends on if you're in Canada, I think it was 7.3 billion, whatever, I don't know how the conversion is, but these things have to be approved by federal agencies who deal with this kind of stuff all the time, so those boxes got checked pretty easily. Then all 5 of the utilities commissions for the 5 states that Avista does business in. Avista owns a smaller utility in Juneau, so Alaska had to approve it, they did. Very small interest for Avista there. Montana, I think they have like 27 customers. They got big dams there, but they have like 27 customers, and I think they're mostly commercial. So they approved it pretty early on. So that left Idaho, big presence for Avista. Oregon, pretty good presence, especially on the gas side. And then Washington, right? The home state, big presence. So they have to go, Avista and Hydro One, hand in hand, file applications and ask the Public Utilities Commission, and these commissioners in Idaho are appointed by the governor. They have to approve this thing. To have it approved, most of the states are similar, but the transaction has to be in the public interest, and it can't result in some massive rate increase. Literally read, the Idaho statute says it can't result in a rate increase, period. But that's kind of hard to argue around because rate increases happen over time by utilities. We did make that argument, and it was probably going to be our leading argument until Doug Ford showed up. Folks know who Doug Ford is? So Doug Ford was, I think he styled himself as kind of the Donald Trump of Ontario, but he won the provincial election, what do they call that guy? The premier in Ontario. And he ran on a promise of fixing Hydro One. This Hydro One had huge rates, the highest rates in the country, and he was going to fire the $6 million man, which was the CEO of Hydro One, and he was going to sack the whole board, and he was going to bring hydro rates down 12%. So get rid of the CEO, get rid of the board of a quote-unquote private company, and lower rates 12%. So what did he do? As soon as he got elected, he got rid of the CEO. Now this is, mind you, Montana and Alaska have done their thing. Washington, Idaho, and Oregon haven't done their thing yet. Idaho has a hearing scheduled. I'd met with the group. We decided, let's file a late motion to intervene. We're only like a year and a half late. Let's file a motion to intervene and say why we're showing up. So we did. And Avista didn't, and Hydro One didn't oppose it. They said they had some concerns, whatever, but they didn't oppose it. So it got granted. The same day that it got granted came the announcement that Doug Ford had forced out or canned or whatever the CEO. Well, how the hell can he do that? It's a private corporation. So then people started looking more closely at the relationship between Ontario government and the corporation and seeing that there really isn't a separation there. He also got the whole board to quit. They're all gone. So what was the last campaign promise? Lower the rates 12%. How the heck is he going to do that? So one of the lines of questioning, I'm fast forwarding now to the hearing that we had in Boise. You go down the line, it's like this row right here is all the attorneys for all the big companies that objected to the merger and then entered into a settlement. Got candy and baubles and beads and stuff, so they're all okay with this deal. I'm literally the only person in the room with this many people in the room that's opposed to the thing. So I get to ask all the questions that I want to, and the commissioners give me great leeway to ask as many cross-examination questions to these French Canadians as I can. So one of the first things I did was establish that they're not like us, because that's one of the arguments of Avista, is they're just like us. It's the same culture, it's going to be great. So I'm having chit-chat with these guys while they're on the stand, and it's the middle of basketball season. What does everybody in Spokane in this area care about during basketball season? Gonzaga. They don't give a rat's ass about hockey. That's all those guys wanted to talk about was hockey. Hockey this, hockey that, how they never get the Stanley Cup, how it's not fair. So that came out, and they do have a French-Canadian accent, so that came out. But what really came out was, we're all concerned that it's not in the public interest. This is what Washington ended up denying the merger on. It's not in the public interest to let Avista be acquired by a company that is owned and controlled by a foreign government, by the province of Ontario. Well, that theoretically, who cares? So what? We're worried, this is what we were going to argue, we're worried that the government could tell the corporation what to do and affect folks in Idaho and Washington. But we didn't have to argue that, because it had already happened. Yes. The premier had sacked the CEO. The legislature in Ontario had passed a law saying you will only pay the officers of the corporation what we say is okay to pay them. They sacked the whole board. So the question was, so he satisfied his campaign promises, right? Yep. Was there anything you could do about it? Not really. Didn't he have one more campaign promise? I don't know. Didn't he say he was going to lower rates 12% in Ontario? How's he going to do that? Well, we don't know. Well, what if you guys acquired Avista and all those richy riches down in the Pacific Northwest pay just a little bit more than they're paying now? Couldn't you lower? Oh God, we would never do that. But couldn't the government order you to do that? Yep. They had to answer yes. I think the answer was, there's nothing that would prevent them from doing that. At that point, the hearing was over. They were never going to recognize it as being in the public interest, which is one of the criteria under the Idaho statute. Before you even get to the criteria, though, there is a statute that was passed in 1951 that says that utilities, assets, water rights, facilities cannot be owned by another state. The concern back then was that Public Utility District from Washington was going to acquire Avista, Washington Water Power. And this statute was passed to prevent that. So we said, before you even get to the criteria, this is going to be owned by a foreign government. Yeah. You know what their defense was? Ontario is not a state. Oh. Therefore, it doesn't apply to us. So they were making the ridiculous argument that while we could prevent the state of Washington from buying Avista, we can't prevent the government of Ontario or Canada or Russia or China from acquiring Avista. So we briefed that issue and we won. So the case was over at that point. Washington had already decided it wasn't the public interest. They stewed over it for a couple of days, figured out how they're going to pay Avista the $103 million penalty or whatever, and withdrew their applications. By the way, in the meantime, what was Oregon doing? Oregon sent out a notice right after Idaho made its decision, and Avista and Hydro One were deciding whether to ask for reconsideration. They sent out a notice saying, we've noticed what's going on in Washington and Idaho. We haven't done anything yet, and we don't intend to do anything until Washington, Idaho approve this. So if that happens, wake us up. In the meantime, we're going to hold it in abeyance. So Oregon never actually did anything. But
Montana, very good. Did they find
Montana talked about reconsidering and reopening, but they never did. They didn't need to. In Alaska, there was noise about reconsidering. Remember, all the boxes have to be checked. If even one box isn't checked, the merger isn't approved. They were running out of time. They had an opportunity to extend by 6 months. They did extend by 6 months, which was at the end of March of this year, and they pulled the plug in January soon after.
Didn't they kind of have egg on their face at that point in the game?
Yeah,
Alaska and Montana? I mean,
well,
gee, it's okay. We'll just go ahead.
so when Alaska and Montana approved it, the thing hadn't happened yet. So, and there wasn't active opposition opposing it like you had here, where when we showed up and we said, we're a Avista customer group, we want to be in this case and we've got concerns. First of all, they didn't know what the hell that was. You didn't have that in Montana or Alaska, mostly because it happened so fast and there just wasn't a customer base. So Idaho was different, Washington was different. We could tell a whole nother chapter of the story with what happened with Washington and folks that led the effort there, but we actually showed up in the case in Idaho. Nobody else did that, to actually organize and show up in the case. And by the way, I didn't know this going in. I've never done anything in front of the Public Utilities Commission, but by the largesse of the legislature, there is a provision that if you intervene in a case and you further the dialogue and help move things along, which we certainly did, then the utility, in this case Avista, is required. So that worked out okay. There's some limits to that, but we had to share it with some other groups that we're in, and there's a cap of so much money that they can award total, but it would have been nice to know that going in. But we did it anyway, so it was a lot of fun. By the way, Avista awarded this $103 million or whatever it is penalty that's part of the merger agreement, that if they had to terminate it or back out, they would pay Avista $103 million. I'm still waiting for a thank you note from Avista, but we haven't gotten it yet. So, by the way, by the time Scott Morris, who was the president CEO of Avista, I guess he's left now, got on the stand, we'd already had a day and a half of French-Canadian witnesses, and the deal was done already. But we went through the motions, and my most serious question for him was, what is it like being the president of the board of trustees of the #1 basketball team in America? What is that like? And he just smiled and said, it's pretty nice. It's the second time it's happened. But we didn't have to make, and our goal wasn't to make Avista out to be bad. It was to demonstrate that foreign ownership of utilities, something as basic as electric utility, was not a good thing. So it was fun. Thanks.